can never forget how hot the flames were against my skin as my entire body was thrown back by the force of the explosion. I remember muttering the name of my wife, Lisa, as I didn't want to die without seeing her or my 2 sons, Michael and Billy, ever again. As the world around me got darker, I wondered how it had all come to this, and my mind began to drift as the memories of my day played out in my head. The day had started like any other. I put on my uniform before pinning my badge to my chest and stepping out for patrol, despite my wife's protests. We'd had a nasty fight the night before as she'd been on edge ever since I'd nearly lost my life in a dangerous operation that happened in Queens about a week ago. I'd lost my partner, Joe, a truly great cop during that operation, and after his funeral, my wife asked me to quit the force for the sake of our family so I wouldn't end up like Joe. I told her that I couldn't. As I said, I know you're worried, Lisa, but doing that right now would just be spitting on Joe's memory. Lisa had tears in her eyes now as she responded,
"What about me, Nathan? What about our boys, Michael and Billy? Aren't we just as important to you?"
"You know I love you and our sons more than anything in the world, Lisa, but I have to honor the badge Joe and my grandfather gave their lives for."
"So just to honor the badge, you're willing to abandon us just like your grandfather did, leaving you and your mother behind, and just like Joe has now left his wife and daughter all alone?"
"I've told you this 1,000 times already, but I'm going to do everything in my power to stay safe while I'm out on duty. Remember, I made a promise that I'll come back home to you and our boys, which I plan to keep. I know your emotions are all over the place right now since we just lost Joe, but there's nothing you'll say that's going to change my mind." It was at this point that Lisa stormed off crying as she took our boys to the car. Even though we'd been married for about 6 years now, this had always been a touchy subject. She was always worried whenever I stepped out of the house, and even though I'd managed to ease her nerves over the years, Joe's death had hit too close to home, and she kept wondering if I was going to be next. My new partner was a young man named Miller. He was a newbie, and I could tell he was nervous, so I told him, "I can tell you're scared and anxious since it's your first time out on patrol, but everything will be okay as long as we have each other's backs." At first, it was a pretty calm and routine night. I was glad Miller didn't have to experience anything crazy on his first night of patrol, but unfortunately, I had spoken too soon, as we'd received a 911 call from a screaming woman. The woman said that there'd been a fight at her house with her relative, and the man had turned on the gas and threatened to blow everyone up. I could see the fear on Miller's face after the call, so I tried to comfort him, as I told him that everything was going to be okay. We then immediately made our way to their home. 6 other officers were already at the scene, and we all surrounded the place. I walked up to the door to de-escalate the situation, but before I could even do anything, the house exploded. There are no words to explain how I felt in that moment, as the force of the flames and the explosion hit me hard. My entire body was thrown back, and I landed hard on the floor, finding it hard to breathe. There was a loud ringing in my ears, but I could hear one of my fellow officers, who luckily wasn't hit too hard by the explosion. My vision was blurry now, and as everything started going dark, I started to call out to Lisa and my boys as I didn't want to die before holding them again. So I fought back the urge to succumb to the darkness, and I did everything in my power to hold on until my fellow officers came to check up on me as they helped me stand on my feet. Despite our severe injuries, we got straight to work as we rescued the civilians, who had all luckily survived the explosion. I was also relieved to see my new partner, Miller, putting on a brave face and helping the other officers rescue civilians. Unfortunately, we weren't able to find any trace of the suspect, and we believed his body had been blown to pieces. After we'd done everything we could at the scene, we were all rushed to the hospital for our injuries. I couldn't even look Lisa in the eyes as she came to visit me with our sons, and she just broke down, begging me once again to put my badge down. Ever since I was a little boy, all I wanted to do was honor the badge that I put on, just like my grandfather had done. That man was my hero, as he had taken my mother and me in after my parents divorced. I'd always wanted to be an officer like him, and even though it hurt when he died, I believed that dying while protecting your city was the most honorable thing an officer could do. However, while I hated to admit it, ever since I married Lisa and after the birth of my boys, I'd had a change of heart, as I didn't want to die like my grandfather or Joe and leave them behind. It was the hardest decision I'd ever made in my life, but I left the force once I got better. Even though I felt really bad about my decision, I decided to find other ways to honor my badge so I could be there for my wife, Lisa, and my sons whenever they needed me. The story you just heard was based on a tragic explosion that occurred on April 30th, 2026 in Queens, New York. The authorities received a 911 call from a terrified woman who said a man was about to blow up their family home. 8 officers arrived at the scene at around 2:54 a.m., and shortly afterward, the suspect poured an accelerant and lit it, setting off an explosion that sent all 8 police officers flying through the air. The explosion brought down the 3-family home, and 7 out of the 8 officers were injured, but luckily the authorities were still able to rescue multiple civilians from the blast after getting back on their feet. It is believed that the suspect lost his life during the explosion, but the investigation is still ongoing. It all began on a normal night in January. I can recall almost every detail about that night because I still have nightmares about it. I was in an Uber, on my way home after another long day, and I was exhausted. One of my clients at work needed more time than usual, so I ended up working really late. I didn't have much planned after work besides getting some sleep. I figured I'd go straight to bed when I got home. The Uber driver had the radio low, tuned into some late-night talk show I wasn't really listening to. I leaned against the window, watching the streetlights pass by. I started to think about what I'd do when I got home. Shower, eat something quick, maybe call my sister if I still had the energy, as I'd been meaning to call her for days. I let my mind drift off to other things, but my phone suddenly buzzed, cutting off my thoughts. I was surprised as I saw it was a doorbell notification from my Doorcam. I started to wonder who could possibly be at the door at this hour. I lived alone, and there was no one at home. I also hadn't ordered anything, and I didn't know anyone in the area well enough for a surprise visit at this time. I reached for the phone with my mind already running through a dozen possibilities. I'd been on high alert since the place I used to live got robbed, so I'd installed the Doorcam just to be safe. At first, I told myself it was nothing and that I was overreacting. However, opening the app didn't bring the relief I was hoping for. For a moment, I couldn't understand what I was looking at. A man was standing eerily still on my porch, centered in the camera's frame. His face was hidden beneath a disturbing red goat mask with large horns on top and a matted beard underneath. The man looked terrifying, as it really seemed like he'd just crawled straight out of a nightmare. He was holding up a sign with Revelation 21-15 scribbled on it. I didn't recognize the Bible passage itself, but I knew the book of Revelation spoke about judgment and punishment to come. I sat up immediately, and the driver, who noticed my sudden movement in the rearview mirror, asked, "Is everything all right, miss?" I stared at him, wondering how I could explain what was going on. I then took a deep breath before saying, "Yes, everything's fine." Even if I'd told him what was happening at my doorstep, it would only alarm my driver. I knew it wouldn't really change anything, so I decided to keep it to myself. As I glanced back at my phone, I noticed the man on my porch hadn't moved an inch. He stood there, facing the camera directly, and even though I couldn't see his eyes through the disturbing mask, it almost felt like he knew I was watching him. I couldn't look away from the screen, and I felt my chest tighten further as we got closer to my house. What terrified me the most was the fact that he wasn't knocking or even trying to get in. He was just standing there, holding up the sign. I locked my phone and set it beside me, and for a few seconds, I just sat there taking deep breaths. I told myself it was a prank or some idiot trying to scare people. I was still a few minutes from home, and I figured if I ignored it, he'd get bored and leave. I sat there for a couple of minutes, which felt like forever. I eventually picked up my phone again, hoping to see an empty porch, but he was still there, standing in the exact same spot. I thought about calling the police or telling the driver to stop and turn the car around, but I didn't know where to go. As we drove through the familiar streets leading up to my house, I started to dial 911, but right before I could place the call, my house slowly came into view. I felt my stomach drop as my porch was now empty. I checked my phone again, and there was no one there. I looked up one more time as the Uber eased closer to my home, and I kept looking around to see if there was any sign of him, but he was nowhere to be found. He'd somehow disappeared as quickly as he'd appeared. Confused as I wondered if he was still nearby or if he'd slipped away in the brief moment I looked away from the live Doorcam footage. It was only when the driver cleared his throat that I realized the Uber was now parked right in front of my house. He asked if we were at the right place, and I said yes before clutching my bag and pushing the door open. I was scared to step out of the car as I didn't want to be anywhere near the house. I thought about calling the police now, but I didn't know what I was going to tell them, as I knew they'd think I was crazy if I called to report a man wearing a goat demon mask. My heart started racing in my chest, as it almost seemed like the masked man would jump out from the darkness and attack me the second the Uber pulled away. I took quick steps into my house, immediately locking the doors behind me. I was shaking inside, and I worried that he had gotten in somehow, but when I turned on the lights, there was no one there except me. I sat on the couch, taking deep breaths to calm my nerves. I then picked up my phone and went over the Doorcam footage again. This time I saw him walk away from the camera's view after standing motionless for several minutes, but the footage still didn't explain how he disappeared so quickly before I got home. I panicked and started scanning through older Doorcam footage. I didn't expect to find anything at first, as I assumed this was just a one-time thing. However, my heart almost stopped when I did, as the night before, the man was there, wearing the same mask and holding up a sign with a different Bible verse. It felt like my heart was about to explode as I moved on to the next video. I was hoping to see something different, but there he was, the same man with a different Bible verse. I started going through videos faster, but he was in every single video captured by my Doorcam. I wondered how I'd never noticed this until now, or why my Doorcam didn't send a notification every time he came to my porch, as he'd been standing there on nights while I was asleep and while I was at work. I immediately called the police, as I knew I couldn't wait until tomorrow morning after what I'd seen. By the time the authorities arrived, I was pacing my living room, as I'd been unable to sit still for more than a few seconds. They asked me a few questions, like if he tried to enter or made any threats, and I told them he didn't do anything yet. After a quick investigation, the authorities said there wasn't enough to classify what he'd done as a crime, as, technically, the man hadn't done anything illegal. He hadn't trespassed, damaged any property, or threatened me, so there wasn't much they could do. They then told me to keep an eye out and call them if he returned. I begged them to leave an officer behind, but that wasn't possible unless things escalated. I wanted to scream and stop them from leaving, as they couldn't just leave me alone like that, but I just stood there, motionless, and watched them go. I was alone again, and I sat on the couch with my eyes frozen wide open and stayed there for what felt like an hour. The day's exhaustion soon caught up with me, and right when it seemed like I would finally fall asleep, my phone buzzed, nudging me awake. I was tired, and my eyes felt heavy, but I sat up the moment I saw the notification. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, desperately hoping that it wasn't what I thought. I slowly clicked onto the notification, and there he was. Same mask, new Bible verse, standing perfectly still. The disturbing story you just heard was loosely based on a real-life case in Carrollton, Texas, where a resident reported a disturbing encounter involving someone in a devil mask who had been routinely appearing at their doorstep. In the Doorcam footage, the unidentified man was always standing still while holding a sign displaying a Bible verse. An investigation to uncover the man's true identity is still ongoing. It felt like any other day at first. After a long day at work, I was looking forward to having dinner with my wife, but first I had to stop by the grocery store to pick up a few things. I checked my watch, and saw it was already 5:20 p.m. The sun was beginning to set, and the streets were getting darker by the minute. I gathered my things, grabbed my keys, and headed downstairs toward the garage. That's when I remembered I'd left my car with a mechanic earlier that morning because of a problem with the gearbox. By the time I stepped outside, I was already imagining the jokes I'd hear from my wife. Whenever I got home later than expected, she loved teasing me about how I was spending time with one of my numerous lovers. The repair shop was only a few blocks from my workplace, so I decided to walk over and pick up the car. The mechanic was already preparing to close when I arrived. He explained that the gearbox had a slight issue and assured me that everything had been fixed. I paid him for the repair and hoped I wouldn't have to deal with the same problem again. As I got back into my car, I noticed the warning light on the dashboard was gone. The strange grinding noise I'd been hearing from the gearbox had disappeared too. For the first time all day, it actually felt like the mechanic had fixed the problem. Once I left the shop, I headed onto the main road and immediately found myself stuck in traffic. While sitting there, I remembered I still hadn't picked up the ingredients I needed for dinner. The grocery store would probably be packed by now, and with traffic building up, I was worried I'd get home much later than planned. Before heading to the grocery store, I stopped at my wife's favorite tea shop and picked up her usual iced tea, hoping it might earn me a little forgiveness for being late. I also got one for myself before heading out. I took a quick glance at my watch and realized it was already 6:20 p.m. I managed to find a parking space near the entrance, which saved me a bit of time. After quickly picking up the groceries and ingredients for dinner, I pulled back onto the road and tuned the radio to my favorite station. By then, thick clouds had rolled in overhead, making the road much darker than it had been only a few minutes earlier. I hoped it wouldn't start raining, so I switched on my headlights and continued driving home. That's when I began feeling uneasy. I couldn't explain why, but something felt off. I checked my rearview mirror several times, looking for anything unusual, but the growing darkness made it difficult to make out much behind me. I took a sip of my iced tea, hoping it would calm my nerves, but the feeling didn't go away. I lowered the volume on the radio so I could pay closer attention to my surroundings. The only sounds I could hear were distant car horns and the steady hum of traffic. A few minutes later, I noticed a road sign pointing toward a shortcut. It wasn't a route I normally used, but I figured it might help me avoid the traffic and get home sooner. Just as I began changing lanes, my phone started ringing. I glanced at the screen and saw it was my wife. At the same moment, a driver in the next lane blasted his horn after I swerved a little too quickly. He shouted something I couldn't quite make out, but I couldn't blame him. My focus was split between the traffic and the incoming call. Once I successfully moved into the correct lane, I answered the phone. My wife, Salma, sounded slightly worried. She asked if I was still stuck in traffic, and I told her I was. To my surprise, she didn't complain. She simply told me to drive safely and get home when I could. I assured her I would, and mentioned that I'd picked up her favorite iced tea on the way home. I could hear her laughing softly, and it made me feel a little better. Before ending the call, she said there was something important she wanted to tell me. I asked what it was. Please try to stay off that shortcut. I've seen some alarming posts online telling drivers to avoid that road because there have been disturbing reports of people going missing after taking it. My stomach tightened slightly because that was the exact shortcut I had already taken. I didn't want to worry her, so I told her I'd be fine and ended the call. As I continued driving, I paid close attention to the road ahead and checked my mirrors frequently. The uneasy feeling returned almost immediately, this time stronger than before. I was beginning to regret taking the shortcut as my wife's words kept ringing in my head. The radio was still playing quietly in the background, and I could feel my anxiety growing with each passing second. A few moments later, I noticed something ahead. A T-first. I couldn't make it out through the darkness, but as I got closer, I realized there was a large tree blocking part of the road. I slowed down immediately and pressed my horn, wondering what was going on. For a second, I considered getting out to see what had happened, But something didn't feel right. Every instinct I had told me to stay inside the car. Before I could decide what to do next, everything changed. Two men suddenly emerged from the woods carrying clubs and started running toward my car. I was terrified. Without thinking, I shifted into reverse and slammed my foot on the accelerator. As the car moved backward, one of the men threw his club at my car with a loud thud, but I didn't stop. I started reciting verses from the Quran as I prayed I'd make it out alive. Then I noticed more figures emerging from the woods. There weren't just two men. There were several of them. At that point, all I cared about was getting away. The car responded immediately, and I silently thanked the mechanic for fixing the gearbox earlier that day. The men continued shouting and throwing objects at my car as I reversed back toward the main road. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I just focused on escaping. As I finally reached the end of the road, I heard one last impact strike the back of my car. I never looked back. I accelerated onto the main road and kept driving. Fortunately, the clouds had started to clear and traffic had thinned considerably. Even then, my hands remained locked around the steering wheel and I couldn't stop replaying what had just happened. By the time I got home, it was 8:45 p.m. I told my wife everything while we drank our iced tea and ate dinner together. She did her best to calm me down, but I didn't sleep that night. Every time I'm driving home late now, I think about that road. Even if traffic adds another 30 minutes to my journey, I never take shortcuts anymore. I'd rather get home late than wonder if I'll make it home at all.